Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar with Birchal. My name is Emily. I'm the Senior Campaign Lead here at Birchal. And just before we get started, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're coming to you from today. Birchal is based on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. So today I am joined by Matt Vitale and Darren Westlake, and soon Kate O'Keefe as well. Birchal's working with Birchal, funnily enough, on their upcoming crowdsource funding offer. A few of you might be unfamiliar with what crowdsource funding is. You might know it as CSF or equity crowdfunding, but essentially it's a relatively new form of fundraising here in Australia that started in 2018 that allows startups and small businesses to raise capital from a large number of smaller or retail investors, as well as wholesale and sophisticated investors through an online platform such as Birchal. So instead of seeking funding from traditional sources such as banks or venture capitalists, companies can turn to the general public and often their communities to raise money in exchange for equity in their business. So Birchal Financial Services will be the licensed intermediary for the offer for Birchal. And I do want to remind everybody that is here today that the information and discussion in this webinar is for informational purposes only and should not be considered as financial advice or a recommendation to invest. So I would implore you all to do your own research and always consider the offer document and the general CSF risk warning before investing. If you do need any more information, please head to birchal.com. If you've got any questions at all, always email us at support@birchal.com. Now, how today's session is going to run, I'll hand over to Matt and Darren in just a moment, and they'll take us through a presentation all about Birchal, where they've come from, and what they're looking to achieve with this capital raise. Then we'll switch to a Q&A session. So if you look at the bottom of your Zoom, you will see a little Q&A bubble. If you do have any questions during the presentation, just pop them in the Q&A bubble and we'll get to all of those questions at the end. We'll try to get through as many questions as possible. If we do run out of time, you can always reach out to Matt or Darren via the Birchal platform. We're also recording today's session, so if you do need to jump off early, a recording will be sent around. You can also send it to a friend if you think that they are interested. Now, I've spoken enough. I'm going to hand over to Matt and Darren.
Thanks so much, Em, and really thrilled that Darren is joining us today. This is our second webinar. We had Dom Pym and Rod Bristow join us for the last webinar, and really keen to hop into some insights from the UK equity crowdfunding industry. And thank you, Darren, for staying back a little bit later, managing the time difference. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, no worries, Matt. Good to be here.
I'm going to canter through our presentation. For those of you that caught our first webinar, some of the information might be repeated, but I think it's worthwhile. Also delighted that Kate O'Keefe, Birchal Director, has joined us today as well, and Kate will be participating in our lively conversation and answering questions towards the end of the presentation. Morning, Kate.
Good morning, Matt. How are you?
Very well. Congratulations on your recent awards at Pause Fest, Heatseeker. Amazing performance. So, all right, let me hop into this presentation now. Just the important legal stuff and disclaimer, and mentioned some of this at the outset, but always consider the offer document and general CSF risk warning before investing. Okay, so we're going to cover a high-level introduction to Birchal, talking about our recent progress, in particular in the FY25 fiscal year, our strategy for beyond, and then, as I mentioned, a Q&A with Darren and Kate. Birchal simplifies fundraising so that innovators can get back to shaping the future that we want. We have an incredible team made up of innovators and some of the most experienced people with this form of fundraising on the planet. Darren and Kate are joining us today, but also Adam Vise, long career in equity capital markets, also Group Treasurer at Australian Unity, and Judy Anderson-Firth, who runs the Euphemia family office, but also the founder of the Startup Network. So Birchal solves a critical funding gap, something that we are faced with in Australia that is holding us back. But essentially, this is something that has been acknowledged by many, including the Productivity Commission, Corporations Markets Advisory Committee, Reserve Bank, all acknowledging that a major constraint on Australia's growth and productivity is this critical funding gap that exists at the earliest stages, so seed and early stage investment. And Australia lags other developed economies in equity financing for early stage businesses. We don't have the pool of venture capital that other established VC ecosystems do. But despite, I suppose, the growth of Australia's venture capital industry, particularly over the last 10 years, there is a major bias towards B2B SaaS businesses, but also the return the model that many VCs and professional investors apply mean that many great businesses go without funding. The Australian Business Growth Fund recently commissioned a report identifying a $38 billion gap for equity funding in Australia. So this is the major problem that equity crowdfunding and the crowdsourced funding regime can help to solve. Crowdsourced funding has unlocked a national pool of investors, over 10 million investors, Australians that have investments outside of superannuation and the family home. And this can be done through the crowdsourced funding regime, which is a regulated framework for early stage businesses to make a public offer of securities. Never before has this been available for businesses at the early stage. It is a robust regime with a range of really innovative consumer protections that have been acknowledged by our regulator ASIC as working and an excellent way for early stage businesses to raise capital. There is a crowdsourced funded offer document, consumer protections, an investor cap, and an intermediary, and that's Birchal's role. We are a licensed intermediary that hosts offers on behalf of companies. There are two game changers that allow us to do what we do. The first is that proprietary limited companies can have a potentially unlimited number of investors, where previously they would need to convert to a public structure once they got over 50 shareholders. And these offers can be advertised broadly in a far more liberal way than really any other offer of securities. And in a relatively short period of time, Birchal has led the equity crowdfunding industry here in Australia. We've completed over 300 successful offers since we launched in 2018, over 218 million raised through the platform. And we've been responsible for more than 70% of all CSF funding volume since 2020. We have big ambitions, though. We see equity crowdfunding and Birchal as following the path of some of the biggest marketplaces, digital marketplaces that Australia and the Australian economy has been known for. In time, in a similar way to browsing technology, enabling large businesses like REA and Seek and car sales, we feel that the liberalisation of securities laws in Australia and around the world will have paved the way for large marketplaces like Birchal will become. And we definitely see ourselves as the REA for startups over time. It's been a challenging few years, but we are set up for success. Any equity crowdfunding industry that we've observed, Darren will offer some comments on the UK path later, but certainly in the States and others around the world, go through a period of ramp up. And these industries have been ramping up during very kind of buoyant market conditions. The last couple of years after zero interest rate policies around the world and higher interest rate environment has given some headwinds to equity capital markets and growth opportunities around the world. But Birchal and equity crowdfunding in Australia is still in its ramp-up phase, and this is part of the reason for the resilience that equity crowdfunding has experienced over the last couple of years, particularly when other parts of the financial system have seen declines in funding volumes. We have encountered some challenges, and we've looked at becoming a leaner, fitter business, and delighted to say that the first quarter of FY25, after a cost reduction program, has seen a significant improvement to our revenues, increase in gross profit, and a 22% reduction in expenses. So even if funding volumes don't resume their growth trend, we've demonstrating that we can be a sustainable and indeed profitable business on lower funding volumes. But we do expect that funding volumes will increase, and many people are confident that we're moving to the next phase of the economic cycle. Before crowdsourced funding, the best founders would have been underserved in capital markets, but equity crowdfunding has ushered in a new generation, a new type of raising capital for businesses. And there have been lots of successes in overseas markets and some in Australia, despite a relatively nascent stage. If we look to the UK, and Darren will be able to share some first-hand experiences, businesses like Brewdog, Monzo, Revolut, in particular, recently returning capital after raising some of their earliest rounds on equity crowdfunding platforms. In Australia, Biome Australia was the first company to raise an early round of capital through the crowdsourced funding regime. They are listed on the ASX now, a $6 million pre-money valuation when we hosted their offer in 2019, a current market cap of approximately 140 million. As I mentioned, we are moving to the next phase of the economic cycle. Certainly the last few weeks of this calendar year have seen increased activity in the IPO market, even on our own platform, increased activity, excellent opportunities like Old Youngs, and I'll speak a little bit more about our Birchal First Syndicate and some of the great traction that we're achieving there. Also, some of these longer term tailwinds is changing attitudes towards risk assets, particularly among Generation Z, rising stock ownership, focus on innovation, sustainability, but also housing challenges, just this acknowledgement that the way that our parents' generation made and built wealth is going to be different, needs to be different to the way that, that emerging generations will. And then a longer term trend in terms of the growth of private markets and a sustained decline in listed markets, meaning that companies are sourcing capital in a different way during the early stages of their journey, and then also looking for different liquidity options and later stage capital options than perhaps companies have previously. So growth economy businesses in Australia are seeking more external funding than they are getting. And as I mentioned before, the Australian Business Growth Fund has actually quantified this at $38 billion equity funding gap. And the Australia's venture capital industry is really only responsible for about $3.5 billion of this. We believe that equity crowdfunding is going to be a key part of this solution, and also at the earliest stage, which is perhaps even more impactful in terms of innovation and the development of these businesses. We are only just getting started, and we're really putting these figures up to highlight that although impressive and significant, what we have achieved through equity crowdfunding is really only scratching the surface of the opportunity that still remains in Australia. So we have a highly scalable revenue model. It's fairly simple. We charge predominantly on success. We've recently increased our success rate from 6 to 7.5%, and this is in line with a lot of the platforms globally. But this year, in an effort to become more financially fit and more sustainable, we've introduced a range of additional products and services, marketing services in particular, and this just highlights the shape of our revenue for the first quarter of FY25. Some of these new initiatives are really starting to get some traction, and over time, we believe the shape of our revenue profile will change. And certainly we're having a look at what has been achieved with larger platforms overseas and diversifying our revenue streams around the opportunities that we are creating by enabling companies to bring equity crowdfunding opportunities to market. Birchal Private, this is really, or the first initiative of Birchal Private is the Birchal First Angel Syndicate, which I'll speak a little bit about shortly, but already this is showing incredible traction. Within 90 days of launching the syndicate, we've facilitated close to $2 million of investment into Victorian hardware technology businesses. But over time, we'll diversify further around media opportunities, membership fees, and the like, certainly borrowing some of the lead from overseas platforms. But Birchal, and in terms of growing our business, it is a marketplace business, and network effects accrue to the platform. So at its core is helping companies tell stories, build communities, and raising capital online. The first phase of our development, it was really defined by this focus on the founder side of the marketplace. And I suppose on reflection, is quite intuitive and evident that that should be the focus in building a marketplace business. That people wouldn't go into a store to buy to buy something if there was no stock on the shelf. So definitely the first phase of our journey has been defined by understanding the founder and simplifying the process as much as possible. As we've grown, the investor side of our audience has started to take a life of its own and become a community in and of itself. The first half of this year, I spent a lot of time with Birchal Power users, high net worth investors, to understand how we could bring more relevant products and services to them. And this definitely informed the Birchal First Syndicate and what we're doing. And this is the first of a range of new initiatives that will really define this next phase of our growth, focus on the investor. And our recent appointments of Rod Bristow, former CEO of Investable, and Darren as a strategic advisor definitely underscore this importance. Looking at our strategic pillars further ahead, I've mentioned a little bit about Birchal Private. The other is an over-indexing of our investors, and this is an extension of the Birchal First Syndicate. And I mentioned our strategic appointments in this regard as well. And then further still is our focus on strategic partnerships. So we are leading from the front, and we hope and expect that much of what we're beginning to achieve, which with the Birchal First Syndicate, will serve as a blueprint for others to fully leverage the power of the equity crowdfunding industry in Australia by being able to access an audience of over 10 million investors, and people will see the true value of what we do as a vehicle to aggregate multiple types of investors, an incredibly efficient and powerful way to organize an early round of capital, and more people will use the equity crowdfunding regime. So this is just a little more on the Birchal First Syndicate, and it is incredibly fulfilling to take something from 0 to 1. And I absolutely need to acknowledge the efforts of Grant Gwynn, Birchal's head of growth, and Carly, and Birchal's head of ops, and everyone that's been involved in bringing this syndicate to life, including Em and our campaign management team in supporting the retail and public phase of these opportunities. But this is an initiative that has been supported by LaunchVic. We stood up a specialized angel network, deciding to focus on hardware technology businesses, particularly because we felt it was a part of the market that was perhaps underserved by traditional and professional investors. Our goal was to bridge that gap, but also provide wholesale investors within the Birchal community the opportunity to engage with businesses before they had started the public offer marketing phase of their campaigns. And delighted to say that it is working. And within the first 90 days of launching, having achieved these results for hardware technology businesses has been nothing short of amazing. A really exciting pipeline of work into next year. In terms of the support that we've received from LaunchVic, the goals for the 2-year grant period is to achieve $6 million of investment into Victorian hardware technology businesses, and we are well on the way to achieving that and more. So extremely exciting. Okay, so I might just throw to Darren now, and might just first of all acknowledge how amazing it is to be working with you after many years observing what you've achieved at Crowdcube in the UK and really pioneering this form of fundraising. And yeah, just acknowledge how special it was when we caught up towards the end of 22 and compared notes on running businesses like ours. But yeah, really delighted to have you on the team and draw on your experience and expertise.
I'm really excited to be part of the team and just to see where we can push Birchal and equity crowdfunding in Australia.
And I might also just throw to Kate O'Keefe as well. There, Kate. And Kate has obviously been instrumental in encouraging Birchal's focus on the customer over the last 12 months and really kind of encouraging us to understand even more about the investors in the Birchal ecosystem, which has really kind of given rise to the Birchal First Syndicate and the first of many initiatives in this new future for us in focusing on the customer through this next phase of our development. Kate, how are we going?
Well, thanks for that question, Matt. And you're right. I mean, I was brought onto the Birchal board about 18 months ago because of my focus. You know, I was formerly the partner in charge of design at BCG. And I also bring, you know, a pretty deep technical and product-based background. So I was delighted to be, you know, brought on in recognition of this new emphasis that the business was taking. And I think for me, what's really exciting is, you know, crowdsourced equity funding is a brand new asset class that's really looking to democratize and open up access to these really exciting, you know, new investment opportunities to a whole new generation of investors. And so thinking about how we capture and serve and delight those investors while they're on this journey and while they're building a diverse portfolio of investments across this new and exciting asset class has been a real pleasure to watch.
Awesome. Darren, I'm really keen to understand from your perspective, like what lies ahead for us in Australia, and your kind of observations of like where we are in development of the equity crowdfunding industry. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, what I've seen so far, and I've yet to visit, I'm going to rectify that in January.
Yeah.
I think there's kind of three ingredients to success when you look at a country's ability to make a success of equity crowdfunding. And I think from what I've seen, Australia has all three of those things. So first of all, it needs to have a strong startup scene and demand from startups to need to raise growth capital. And that certainly seems to be there. Secondly, there needs to be a culture amongst the people in that country for them to really understand the nature of equity investment and to want to be able to back and take an interest into startups. And again, that it looks like that's there as well. And the final one is probably the hardest of the three that we've experienced anyway. And you guys seem to have been successful in getting through this. And that's having a regulator and a government that actually understands the need for alternative finance and then can put in place appropriate regulations to let equity crowdfunding and alternative finance flourish and grow. And again, that seems you guys seem to have that in place as well.
I'm keen to understand some of these like key inflection points that you've experienced in the UK. Based on my observation and our previous conversations, it seems that these successes and exits and returns for businesses have kind of heralded these kind of inflection points or unlock further growth for the industry. Just maybe keen to understand your observations on some of the successes that you've achieved in the UK, or investors rather. Yeah.
There's a few points that I think about in our journey that have really changed the trajectory of the growth of both Crowdcube and also the industry in the UK. I think the first one was really be able to fund big deals with big brands, getting some of the really hottest startups in the country to use equity crowdfunding rather than using VCs. Typically, the hot startups there, their tendency is to choose the big VCs to raise money from and not to use crowdfunding. And over time, we started to win them and fund them. And you mentioned a few before with Monzo and Revolut, and there's great stories that I can go into around those as well. And there's winning over those VCs and getting those VCs to recommend crowdfunding to their portfolio companies for future rounds. That seems to be something that you guys have not managed to crack yet. And hopefully together, maybe that's something that we can work on. And once you've got VCs involved, then you've got really clear pricing, and that pricing is then validated by a lead investor. And you've also got retail investors that then want to follow those professional investors. So it's easier to get those campaigns to be successful because you've got those cornerstone VCs involved as well.
Incredible.
Is that
And
helpful?
maybe maybe if you can share, I suppose, how, like in particular, like Revolut, I suppose, your observations of how that recent success is going to kind of pave the way for further growth in the UK. From where we sit in Australia, the UK is perhaps 10 times the size of Australia's. In per capita terms, kind of highlights the opportunity ahead for us, but I think that there's probably further growth still in the UK.
If you look at equity crowdfunding globally, in my opinion, it's still in its infancy globally. We haven't scratched the surface of its potential. In the UK, that's definitely the case, and we've been going for 13 years in the UK. And so even more so in Australia, you guys really are at the dawn of what's going to be possible. And I think Birchal can be a 20x, 30x company in the future with all the growth and opportunity as ahead of it. So you mentioned Revolut. Revolut is a neobank, a digital bank in the UK. They did their first raise using Crowdcube in 2015. And when they came to us, they were Series A level and they had a valuation of £40 million. They raised a couple of million with Crowdcube and had 400 or so investors at that 40 million valuation. They've been going for about 7 or 8 years now. Incredibly, their valuation is now $45 billion. And the average investment that was in that first round was £2,000. And that investment is now worth £1 million, which is just insane. Unfortunately, right now, it's paper value, but there have been secondaries that have been done recently in Revolut. So that has kind of demonstrated and crystallized that valuation. So hopefully as that goes on, and there's rumors about it IPOing in the US quite soon, we'll get those really big, amazing returns to prove crowdfunding can go on and make people a lot of money.
Did you get into Revolut?
Embarrassingly, I didn't know.
It becomes a very expensive exercise investing in offers on your platform. I imagine once you fund 1,000 businesses, it's probably something that can be difficult to fund personally. So,
I've got a pretty big portfolio, but I tend to be quite small investments, especially in the early days when I was a very poor entrepreneur and had no money to invest.
I'm mindful of being able to answer some questions, Em. Just seeing if there are any questions, or certainly invitation for questions. Yep.
Not just yet, but please, everybody, if you have any questions, pop them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen so we can get started on those, because I suspect there'll be quite a few.
Darren, one of the things that comes up quite often is secondary markets and liquidity. And this is something that we have we've piloted in Australia with a low volume market, certainly encouraging others that are in market offering solutions to this this liquidity challenge, if you like. How, like in the UK, how is this managed, and what opportunities like are there to kind of further develop exits or secondary market liquidity? Yeah.
Secondaries and exits and returns of all kinds are really important for our companies and our industry. Investors love the fact that they're backing businesses and they can see those businesses go on to grow and be successful, and they feel part of it by doing that. But at the end of the day, most people want to see some return on the investment that they make in that company. So for us and for you guys as well, getting to a point where we can start to demonstrate returns and show some capital going back to our investors was incredibly important for us. And there's a number of ways we can do that. So we can do, as you mentioned, we can do very simple secondary markets, and there's some regulatory issues around that in the UK, which makes it quite difficult to do. And it's also very difficult to balance supply and demand on a marketplace to make sure that although there'll be plenty of people probably wanting to sell their stakes that have grown in value on paper, there may not be people who've got the relevant understanding of that company to want to buy shares in that company. So secondary markets are quite complex. But bespoke secondary transactions where you have a big buyer perhaps who wants to buy into a successful company and wants to buy out the crowd, that's where we've had a lot of success. We found big institutional buyers who wanted to buy £20 million worth of a certain company, and we facilitated those and got returns back to investors. So far from CrowdCube point of view, we've had 88,500 people have had some kind of returns through the platform, whether that's because the company was acquired through secondaries or through dividends as well, because some companies do actually go on to make a profit and then return dividends as well. So that is starting to happen. And again, for us, it's really proving that concept of, you'll have experienced yourself in the early days. There's so many naysayers, so many skeptics who think that this is a flash in the pan, a new concept that's not really going to work. It's proving to them that this concept really does work, not only in terms of funding the company, but right the way through to returning capital to those investors as well.
Having started this, perhaps the first time anywhere, imagine it would have been really difficult communicating to people your vision for what this is, and to get people to take you seriously. Certainly with other parts of the financial system, VCs and other professional investors. Maybe if you can just kind of share your reflections on getting people to take you seriously, and then what the UK industry looks like in terms of collaboration with other parts of the financial system.
Oh yeah. So as I just mentioned, probably the biggest challenge we had from the start was skepticism from lots of different people in and around the market, but typically the incumbents, and that's VCs, angel networks, angel investors themselves, who all thought, as I mentioned, that this is some new internet phenomenon that will come and go within a year or two, and we were determined, obviously, to prove that wrong. And it was a hard battle, and it took a really long time, but we persevered as you have to do. And the way we did it was through a few different things, but basically through proving our track record. And that was winning some of the bigger deals. So getting people like Monzo and Revolut, who were the hottest startups around, and getting them to understand the benefits of crowdfunding. And that's an important point, because as you well know, it's not all about the financial benefits, because Monzo and Revolut could have raised £1 million from a dozen different of the biggest VCs. But what they understood was the benefits you get, the non-financial benefits of raising money through crowdfunding. So one of the things that Monzo realized in their first round with us, and what they did when they looked at the data, was that of their customer base, anybody who was a customer and also a shareholder, they were 43% more active on their app than a normal customer, and they were 3 times more likely to tell a friend to recommend using Monzo to somebody else. So it was that kind of engagement and that evangelism, if you like, about the brand that these big companies understood. And that's how we started to convince these companies to come and use equity crowdfunding. And then that helped us win over the VCs, because the VCs were like, well, we want our portfolio companies to be successful, and we want them to use this new technology and this new concept to be able to grow. So they're actually encouraging them to do a hybrid round where the VC would put in 80% of the capital, and they'd raise 20% of it through crowdfunding. And gradually that won over all of those incumbents, and some of those angel networks started to kind of build their own online platforms because they understood that's the way that the industry was going.
Incredible. Lots of things, I think, ahead for us, things that we can kind of borrow and run with in Australia. Might just throw to Em for any questions from those playing at home.
We've had a few questions come through, and Kate, also feel free to jump in if you've got some great answers as well, because I know you've got a lot to bring to the table. So you've mentioned in the presentation, Matt, that you're considering investor subscription fees as an additional revenue stream. Has this been done by other CSF providers, and what would this potential income stream look like in terms of a dollar value?
Well, I might just first throw to Darren if investor subscription fees, if this was something that had been adopted by Crowdcube. I know certainly WeFunder and Start Engine in the States have an Amazon Prime style kind of membership where they're able to offer like bonus shares for some of their kind of most passionate subscribing members and things like that. Obviously, there are regulatory challenges, but did Crowdcube implement anything similar on the investor side?
Really, in terms of a regular subscription fee, but we do charge investors a percentage of their investment as a fee for finding the best deals.
Mm-hmm. And but yeah, in terms of membership fees, we've seen kind of precedent for this in overseas markets. I think from Birchal's perspective, focusing on the investor, finding additional things that are important to investors give us the opportunity to add value, but also earn value. And that's, I think, what every business should be doing, is looking at opportunities to, solve needs and wants and address needs and wants of their customers, and then have the opportunity to earn value for that as well. Hopefully that's.
Yeah. That was a great answer. So obviously, Birchal's done raises in the past, the last one being around about this time last year. What was the value of the offer last year? And then I guess the value of this offer will be released when the offer goes live next week. Is that correct?
That's right. Yep. So we're preparing for our third crowdsource funded offer. Our first offer in 22 was at $1 per share, which inferred a pre-money valuation of approximately $44 million. We closed that raise in 2 hours. We raised $3 million in 2 hours and had $2.5 million of oversubscribed interest. Our last raise was approximately 12 months ago, December 23. We raised $2.4 million over 9 days at 50 cents per share. And that inferred a pre-money valuation of approximately $22.5 million. And as you can see, it was a down round just by those numbers, and a lot was said and explained to existing shareholders and the market. And that was something that I think was important for Birchal to go through as a leader, and highlighting that the pricing of capital and risk does fluctuate in response to market conditions. And we went through the process that we encourage all companies to, and we had conversations. We went through a process of price discovery, and we met the market for our last raise. We're in the midst of that process now, and we're expecting that. My expectation is that it'll be a similar share price to last year, certainly based on the conversations that I've been having with investors. But this will finally be determined when the offer document is published next week.
Awesome. So with the idea of the investor fees coming in, do you think that that could create a barrier or a perceived barrier to the crowd coming in through equity crowdfunding?
There are a range of things that we will be looking at in terms of our fee model. That's certainly on the issuer side. We've increased our fees from 6% to 7.5%. The first time that we had done that at all in our 6-year journey. And I think a business that was not, was burning cash, I think is entitled to look at its fee model, and we've seen that there hasn't really been a decrease in in pipeline or as a result of that, and certainly it's in line with practices overseas. There is further I suppose work to do on our fee model on the issuer side. And as this question's identified, potentially on the investor side as well. Exactly what that looks like, that's kind of something that an opportunity, I suppose, that we'll be looking at as things progress. But that people should expect that there will be, given the importance of financial sustainability and our recent focus on expenses and revenue, that we will continue to be iterating on our fee model and making sure that it responds to our customer wants, but also our needs as a business.
Thank you. So there might be a perception that Birchal is known by a lot of industry professionals and people with AFSL licenses, et cetera, et cetera. How do you tackle the approach of trying to get the Birchal name out to the general public and investors as well? Because we're having some comments come through that Birchal might not be known to a lot of the general public.
It's the frustrating and exciting in equal measure, but I am actually going to throw to Kate and Darren for their perspectives on this, because I'm sure you both have very different and interesting things to say. Maybe I'll throw to Kate first.
Yeah, I'd love to. So thus far, like until this point, we've really looked at those who are raising on our platform to bring their communities with them. So whether it's an amazing food and bev brand or it's a sustainability brand, so often those that are raising on our platform, are bringing their crowd with them. And what's exciting about the question that's been asked, and thank you to whoever asked it, is that we do think there were really 2 opportunities to drive more growth. One is to drive up repeat investment on our platform. To deliver such a positive experience to those that are on the platform that they get really excited about building up a diverse portfolio of different investments on our platform. And of course, that means finding deals and opportunities and investments outside their local brewery that they might have backed in the past. So we think that's a really big opportunity for growth. And to your point, another is for us ourselves to find investors and build our own community across Australia and be a platform that brings a crowd to those that are raising on our platform. And we've already seen that, particularly with our syndicate deals, where we have the investor community and folks don't necessarily have to bring it with them. So we are building those muscles within our business, and we're really looking to double down on that in the new year. And you'll see that with a lot of the press momentum that you're seeing online. You've seen a really big push. We have a brand new head of growth in Grant, who is at West Tech Fest right now, pounding the pavement and putting our name out there. He's the one pushing for all of these really cute videos of Matt, sharing with the community on LinkedIn what this week's deals are. I think you're doing a great job, Matt, and we really are, getting the word out there. So it's been really exciting to see the momentum. It's been one of the biggest shifts that I've seen in the business in the last 4 or 5 months. Darren, did you have some builds?
To my earlier point about how we're still in the infancy of equity crowdfunding, um, this just shows the opportunity ahead of us. Most people don't understand what equity crowdfunding is, and most companies aren't even aware that they can raise money using equity crowdfunding. And this is the opportunity and the growth that we have ahead of us, globally and in Australia. Just kind of on tactics, one of the things that we were successful with in Crowdcube was PR, which is a great low cost way of getting your name out there, because the beauty of the model that we have is every company that's funded is a story in itself, and somebody somewhere wants to write about it. And when they write about that story, they're going to be writing about Birchal as well. So it's a great way of getting out there for very little money.
Mm.
Brilliant. Thank you. So this kind of ties in actually to the last question, but I know that Birchal used to do rewards for like referral fees. So referring a friend to invest in a campaign. What are the incentives that you've considered to, bring the crowd along and bring in friends to actually invest in companies?
For Birchal shareholders and other invited participants, we do have a referral scheme for introducing companies. Like these referral programs are things that we're always kind of monitoring in terms of effectiveness, but also there is a regulatory consideration that we need to be mindful of as well. So that they're kind of one of many initiatives that would be looking at to drive growth and encourage more people to use the platform and refer friends. But as a regulated business, we always need to consider the law and making sure that we're kind of doing things appropriately and encouraging people that participate in these schemes to do things appropriately as well. And that can be the challenge sometimes when you're, kind of referring investors or referring friends to invest. But yeah.
Great. So from a revenue perspective, are there any plans to increase issuer fees in the future?
Are there any plans to increase issuer fees in future beyond 7.5%? Potentially, as I said, we're always looking at our. I think periodically we'll always be looking at our fee model, and it's something, whether or not it's the headline percentage that's increased or it's us kind of iterating around like how it's structured. But I think any business, certainly at our stage, needs to periodically and consistently be looking at its fee model to make sure that it's optimized. And that's on both sides. It needs to work. If it doesn't work for customers, then we will lose out in terms of pipeline and deal flow, and our customers will tell us. So we want to be adding as much value as possible, and we want our customers to be delighted to be paying us as much as possible.
Great, thank you. So there's a few questions around the future for Birchal and how that looks, potentially listing on the ASX and returns for investors. Can you give a bit of a scope on why that might be difficult to talk about at this stage?
In terms of like exits and future opportunities, not difficult at all. We want to become a really significant part of the financial system. We want to be systemically important, and that will require, big friends, I suppose. We're small but mighty, but we're going to be able to scale our impact by partnering and aligning with people. And if that is an ASX IPO story, with other friends, maybe that's kind of one way. If it's teaming up with others that find our business strategically important for what they're wanting to achieve, that's potentially another way. I think one of the amazing things about our business is there are so many types of businesses that could find an equity crowdfunding platform really important and beneficial to what they're wanting to achieve. And these could be diversified financials businesses, brokers, investment banks, media companies, and many others. But again, I'm going to throw to Kate and Darren, because I know each of you will have really interesting and diverse thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, Darren, do you want to go first on this one? Because you've seen how this has played out in other markets.
I mean, obviously, it's been close to our hearts in Crowdcube as to what the exit story is for us, and that's something that we're still working towards. And we scoped out like the potential universe of potential acquirers, and it was huge. We had probably 75 different companies in there just in the UK who could potentially acquire us from all walks of business. As you mentioned, Matt, there is a big variety there. So we never really saw that as a challenge. We just thought that inevitably that's going to happen at some point in the future. The main thing for us was to focus on growing the business and getting profitable and growing revenue, and not really thinking too much about what that exit looks like.
Yeah. When I was brought onto the board, my experience at Cisco and Silicon Valley, where we bought a company about every 5 weeks, was one of the key capabilities that we were looking to bring into Birchal. And one of the ways that we always used to like to think about building our portfolio of acquired companies was we would challenge founders to think about the product that they were building, and then to start thinking about their business as a product. How will others in the market see you as strategically valuable? So I've always been very transparent that building Birchal's, I guess, acquisition consciousness has been part of my contribution to the business. And that is, as Matt said, it's part of our personal commitments to deliver more of the Birchal crowdsource equity funding capability to the Australian market. We feel very passionately that more investors need a chance to invest in this way. We feel really passionately that more founders need a chance to raise in this way. And if that means an acquisition in the future, then we'd be very comfortable with that.
Brilliant. Thank you. Those were some really great answers. So what do you perceive are the barriers for competitors entering into the CSF market?
These are difficult businesses to start and to run. Yes, Birchal has always seen ourselves as a high volume business. So we've focused on doing as much work as possible, because that the great thing about marketplace businesses is network effects accrue to the platform. So doing more work, more volume means we can provide better insight, a better level of service, better returns to investors, Birchal investors, and be profitable. Yes, it probably is hard for others to I suppose enter the market, but I don't spend too much time thinking about our competitors, really, and it's how do we make this industry as big as possible is the question that we're focused on as quickly as possible, and looking at the experience in the UK and others around the world, and becoming a systemically important method of funding for businesses is what kind of we're focused on. I will say, though, there has been some movement in the competitive landscape in Australia with new entrants and other exits and so on. And I think over time there is a natural consolidation to larger platforms, because these, as regulated businesses, they can be expensive to run, and it does require a certain amount of skill and expertise. And I'm not sure that the market can support 15 equity crowdfunding platforms, and I think that there's approximately that many licenses around. But really, all of the activity is taking place on 3 or 4 platforms, and I think that competitive dynamics improve, I suppose, over time through that consolidation, but it's not something that we're so preoccupied by. We don't really measure our success in response to, our kind of perceived direct competitors. Our success is how well and how quickly we're pursuing the opportunity that is ahead of us as an industry.
Yeah, I might just build on that one for just a minute. Birchal is a two-sided marketplace. We bring together amazing founders with an amazing investor group. And every two-sided marketplace, no matter what the industry, struggles with what we call the cold start problem. Those founders are always going to favor the platform that has hundreds of thousands of investors already sitting there, waiting to hear about their deal. So Birchal has incredible momentum in the marketplace. I don't know, Matt, you'll have to give me, the latest quarters in market share numbers. What are they, 70%, 60%?
Yep, above 70%. Yep.
Above 70%. So I think founders are always going to go, smart founders are always going to go with the momentum. It will be a difficult market entry. Having said that, we believe in the sector. We believe, to Darren's point, that the sector has a lot of room to move. Me and Matt don't actually agree here. I wouldn't mind seeing a little bit more, competitive activity. We're a regulated business, so we don't want to be a monopoly. That's when you get into trouble. And we think there's so much growth available in the marketplace that if there was an entrant, then that would demonstrate, that there's more voices out there talking about how great crowdsourced equity funding can be. Having said that, we are enjoying, a very compelling market position right now from a competitive perspective.
Great stuff. So this is more of a comment, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. So somebody has suggested that there should be a part of the website that gives a brief summary of all of the companies that we've raised for and how they're going. So sharing a bit of the success stories, because there can be a little bit of rhetoric around companies that might have gone under in the past or failed, but the success stories should be prominent. Is that part of Birchal's strategy?
Noted. We probably don't do. We could always do more in celebrating the successes. I think over time there's lots of really exciting things that we could do. We've talked about having an index that, maybe one day Alan Kohler and his, ABC Nightly, business reports can report on the equity crowdfunding index and the movements for the day or for the week. Lots of really cool stuff that we can do, that we get to do as we become a more systemically important part of the financial system. But yeah, it's a great idea.
Yeah, I love that too, Matt. I think we're delighted to be super transparent. I do find some of the narrative about, businesses that have failed and are we acknowledging, I don't see a lot on the ASX website about public companies that have failed either. I'm being cheeky here, but look, we're very transparent, about the fact that every investor, when they're participating, needs to be careful about deploying their capital, as they must about any investment. I do find, though, how folks want to attribute the success or failure to those who have raised on our platform to us. We're a platform just like the ASX, that the ASX is, and we like to think we do a better job than most of supporting people to make really careful decisions when they're investing.
I'm with you, Kate. I could not echo those sentiments more. Okay, we've run out of time today, but that being said, if anybody has gotten any questions and they do want to get in touch with anybody from the Birchal team, if you head to the Birchal website, go to Browse Companies, click on Birchal, there is a message button so you can get in touch with the Birchal team. If you've got any questions about equity crowdfunding as a whole, please reach out to support@birchal.com. We'd be happy to answer your questions. And if you haven't expressed interest in the campaign already, please do, so that you'll be the first to know when the offer does go live. But I appreciate everybody's time today. Thank you so much, Darren, Kate, and Matt, for your time today. And thank you everybody who has come along for your amazing questions as well. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Have a great day.